Think about this. If you had asked me to house sit your home while you're on vacation, and by the time you returned, I had swapped out all your family photos and gave away half your home to someone who simply said they wanted it, would you be happy? We elect government officials to represent the will of the people, but that doesn't seem to actually happen. Some would argue that this is the result of having an electoral college. Others would argue that it's the first past the post system that's the problem. Regardless of the reason, we're left with our systems and our politicians that are effectively giving away parts of our home when we trust them to take care of it. In this episode, we'll take a look at some of the most egregious misrepresentations of the will of the people by elected officials, which have led to giving away power, land, and money to special interest groups. From perpetually increasing taxes in Canada, giving away the entire city of Vancouver, to Tim Walz intentionally giving billions to Somali daycare fraud, to land acknowledgements that shore up the idea that we're all living on stolen land. These are the views that our governments push upon us in spite of the majority of us seeing it completely different. If you enjoy these conversations as much as I do, hit that like and subscribe button. My name is Chris, and this is the Think Report. If you were to ask someone on the street if they thought taxes were too high, the majority would say yes. However, if you ask the same people if the government should stop spending on programs that they're interested in, they would say no. The psychology behind it is straightforward. Abstract spending feels wasteful. It's a faceless number. But concrete programs, our programs, my programs, your programs, feel essential. Nobody thinks their highway or their school or their lunch program, their injection site, or their mortgage interest deduction is the problem. It's always someone else's benefit that's the excess. We elect politicians to own the responsibility of balancing this budget, yet they don't. The result is politicians continue to spend more and more on programs that appeal to their voter base, while skirting accountability for overall spending. Canada is in some serious trouble with this, but let's start with the US. Reports from many sources illustrate that 6 of California's billionaires have been widely reported to have left the state to avoid the proposed 5% wealth tax.
Now, you might have seen some headlines and some posts on X over the last few weeks where some very high-profile billionaires have left the state. So the Google co-founders, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, they left. They bought property in Miami. I think Larry Page paid $100 million for a house there in December, something like that. Peter Thiel also left. A few others have left.
That small cohort would have collectively generated $27 billion in revenue, roughly 25% of the initiative's projected $100 billion haul. Which makes sense. When you're paying millions of dollars in taxes, or billions in this case, one would certainly give up their state to save that kind of money. This is best represented with the Laffer Curve, developed by Arthur Laffer. As tax rates increase, total government revenue increases until it reaches a point where citizens start to get creative about saving on taxes, until they eventually leave their state or their country altogether. Then, as tax rates continue to increase, overall revenue for the government will decline. The general population of California also reflects this sentiment. 54% of Californians believe taxes are too high, compared to 2% who think they're too low. One of the reasons these injustices in government happen is almost always due to a conflict of interest. Politicians need to make promises to their constituents in order to gain their support. But when they do, it's almost always an added burden to the taxpayer. They never say they're going to remove from Program A in order to start Program B. They can't. It would compromise the votes they would receive from supporters of Program A. Take a look at the Minnesota childcare fraud. Billions of dollars were funneled to care centers that had no children. It is documented that Governor Tim Walz was aware of the fraud and did nothing to prevent it. Again, he can't act against it. The Somali community, which includes roughly 100,000 people, has been crucial to Democratic success in Minnesota. This is the origin of political corruption. Politicians are willing to bend their morals in order to appeal to their base.
When would you say we concretely knew that widespread welfare fraud was occurring in Minnesota?
There have been reports since 2009 from the Office of Legislative Auditor. I would say the credible reports on childcare fraud started surfacing 2011 to 2013.
So for over a decade.
Yes, sir.
When do you think Governor Walz knew about this fraud?
From the very beginning. He was running for governor in 2018 when there were prosecutions going on, when there was an OLA report, active cases in the news all the time.
Got it. So would you say this is the Somali population is an important demographic for Democrats to win over politically?
Unquestionably.
Got it. And do you think it would have hurt Democrats' political standing with the Somali population to investigate this fraud?
Very clearly.
Unfortunately, what politicians like Tim Walz fail to realize, or perhaps they don't care about, is that the people who are hurt the most by allowing this to happen are the Somalis who don't break the law. Canada is arguably worse than Minnesota and California in the tax department. But what is even worse is the Canadian government's disregard for private property rights. On February 20th, 2026, the Canadian federal government signed historic agreements with the Musqueam Indian Band, recognizing their rights and title over 500,000 hectares of land in southern BC, covering what is essentially all of Metro Vancouver. I'll just repeat that. The federal government gave Canada's 8th largest city with a population of 700,000 people to someone else. If that's not treason, I don't know what is. They basically gave away our home. Vancouverites are clearly up in arms about this. But more to the point, did the broader public even feel that Indigenous communities needed their own separate land? Nope, of course not. This chart by Angus Reid shows that 60% of Canadians nationally prefer First Nation communities to be governed by the same systems and rules that other Canadians are governed by, versus 40% who support moving greater Indigenous independence and self-governance. This suggests that government policies pushing Indigenous self-governance and land title transfers are directly at odds with that of the majority of Canadians. This illustrates that government policies pushing Indigenous self-government land and title transfers are directly at odds with what the majority of Canadians actually want, from coast to coast. Despite public opinion, Vancouver was handed to the Indigenous. In Canadian law, rights in title is a synonym for ownership. It's serious legal language. So essentially, all the private owners who previously held rights in title, that's homeowners, business owners, have now been superseded by this federal agreement which transfers those rights to the Musqueam Indian Band. It's a complicated legal issue, much of which hinges on a related ruling. In early August 2025, BC Supreme Court Justice Barbara Young ruled that the Quo-Sun Nation holds Aboriginal title between 300 and 324 hectares in the city of Richmond, just south of Vancouver. The court declared that Canada and private residents of Richmond's free simple titles and interest are invalid, but suspended that declaration for 18 months to allow the parties to negotiate an orderly transition of the lands.
Publicly questioned the horrors of the past.
We're in Richmond, British Columbia, where a court ruling has people who live here worried. They own their land, they have titles of ownership, but Cowichan Nation argued it should have Aboriginal title to this land. A court agreed, and now everyone is trying to figure out what that means.
Here's the land at the heart of the dispute, about 325 hectares. Some of it is owned by the federal government and the city of Richmond, but part of it is also privately owned under something called fee simple title, how most people own property in Canada. Thomas Isaac specialises in Aboriginal law. He says that part of the decision puts the province's land title system on shakier ground.
What we've ended up with is a very large decision, upwards of almost 4,000 paragraphs from the BC Supreme Court that essentially held that Aboriginal title can apply to private property. And so that proposition is significant. We've not had a court expressly state that on Aboriginal title.
In 2022, following the DRIPA legislation, the BC government issued internal directives limiting how aggressively its own lawyers could defend against Aboriginal title claims. In plain terms, the province's lawyers were legally constrained from defending private property owners' interests in court. If this isn't treason, I don't know what is. How does all of this happen? Just like perpetually increasing taxes and the Minnesota childcare fraud, corruption is at the source here. This agreement was signed by Rebecca Alty, the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations. Alty is the Liberal politician who won the Northwest Territories riding. Interesting fact, 51% of her riding is Indigenous. Since Canada is a representative democracy where representatives are supposed to enact the will of the people they represent, Alty, as Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, will never turn down any request to transfer land to Indigenous communities. She literally can't. It's a complete conflict of interest. The Indigenous constituents she represents will always want her to hand land and ownership to the Indigenous people. In 2026, land acknowledgements are ubiquitous throughout Canada. You can't go to a sports event, a classroom, a council meeting, a debate, you name it. In the US, they're becoming more popular as well, pushed by universities, corporations, and government bodies.
I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. This land acknowledgement is a recognition of shared history as a nation.
But here's the thing. Ask the average Canadian or American what they think of land acknowledgements, and the response is usually somewhere between eye-rolling, indifference, and outright frustration.
To all the people who start every public event now with one of those land acknowledgements where they say, I'm standing on land that was stolen from the proud Indigenous people of the Chumash tribe, I say either give it back or shut the fuck up.
In a 2025 study by ACS, 54% of Canadians believe they don't live on stolen land, contrary to what land acknowledgements will have us believe. In spite of the majority of Canadians disagreeing with land's acknowledgement messaging, governments still push them like they aren't just hollow theater. In the US, the story is much the same, albeit less ubiquitous. In an article by CNN, they interviewed Indigenous communities to get their thoughts. According to a CNN interview, another issue that this person observed was that many people seem too caught up in the particulars of the statement's wording without enough consideration on how they planned to support Indigenous communities moving forward. It's not about the verbiage, she says. It's not about your statement being correct. It's not about performance either. It's about the action that needs to happen. So are we going to give up our homes? I always thought no. But in the case of Vancouver, maybe that's true. But not at the will of the residents. No one wants this. So what are these acknowledgements for? They're not for the Indigenous communities, many of whom have said publicly that they prefer governments to focus on clean water, housing, and economic opportunity over scripted recitations before hockey games. They're not for the general public who increasingly tune them out or resent them for being told again that they're thieves stealing ground beneath their feet. And here's the deeper problem. Land acknowledgements don't just divide people, they prime people. Every time a government official steps to a podium and declares that we are guests on someone else's land, they're laying the ideological groundwork for exactly what we just talked about in Vancouver.
New tonight, the Sacramento City Council voting to start all future meetings with a recitation that honors Indigenous people. We talked about this a few weeks ago. Meetings have traditionally opened with the Pledge of Allegiance, but the change was proposed to recognize that each public meeting is being held in traditional Native American territory. The land acknowledgement, as it's called, will be read after the Pledge of Allegiance.
The Vancouver Agreement, the Richmond ruling, the DRIPA legislation, these things don't come out of nowhere. They come from decades of quietly shifting the conversation one boilerplate statement at a time, until we normalize the idea that private property in Canada is illegitimate. If governments actually represented the will of the people, land acknowledgements wouldn't exist. Instead, they're mandatory, government mandated, and everywhere. A daily reminder that people in charge have a very different vision for this country than the people they claim to represent. That's not reconciliation, that's indoctrination. The threat connecting all of this is simple. Governments have stopped representing the people who elected them. Whether it's the taxes that never stop climbing, billions funneled to fraudulent programs, cities handed over without public vote, or land acknowledgements pushed on a population that largely rejects them, the pattern is the same. Politicians serve the interests that keep them in power, not the people who put them there. They pander to the woke narrative pervasive in broken mainstream media. The frustrating part? None of this is inevitable. Representative democracy works when the representatives actually represent. The question is whether enough people are paying attention to demand that they do. Think about that.